party tonight. Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright!
Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews.
Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight!
Alright!
We'll pass out on the couch, alright!
Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Don't talk about anything else. We don't want to know. We're dedicated to our favorite shows.
You know, unfortunately, tonight, we're not talking about our favorite show. This is TV Party Tonight. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And once again, I am joined by the punchy pugilist, Mr. Pat Mullin, totally 80s Pat Mullin, and we are here to memorialize yet another wrestler who has passed away. Tonight, myself and Pat Mullin remember Big Van Vader. Welcome to the show, Pat. How you doing tonight?
I'm good, Mark. Unfortunate subject matter we have to cover, but this is how we do things here, and we want to pay some respect and tribute to one of the great entertainers of the 1990s, and that being the late Big Van Vader, Leon White. Full power Leon White, baby bull Leon White. Many names, one he's best known by. And tonight, for the hour that we have in front of us, it's, of course, Vader time.
It's time, it's Vader time. As we all know, I'm from New York originally, the Northeast, same as Pat. But Pat has more familiarity with the NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, etc., etc. I was a straight-up WWF guy, so I had no idea who in the hell Big Van Vader was until 1996 when he showed up in the WWF to terrorize Shawn Michaels. And my first impressions of him were, I didn't understand what the jockstrap on the head was all about, but they really pushed him as quite the monster in the WWF, and I wished behind the scenes things had worked out better between him and Shawn Michaels and they'd done the full trilogy, because I really enjoyed their SummerSlam match. And it's the same, Shawn Michaels was such a diva at the time that they couldn't get it to work. Vader also had a string of bad luck in the WWF, but we'll get to it. I want to throw it over to Pat and talk about his earliest memories and familiarity with good old Vader.
Yeah, so I'm not going to be the guy who says, oh yeah, I remember him as Baby Bull Leon. What? No, the first remembrance I have of him is as Big Van Vader in WCW, coming down the aisle wearing a elephant style Road Warrior shoulder pad helmet combo, and just being like, what is this? This is different. And this huge guy who would just brutalize whoever was in front of him, and would constantly talk about how he fears no man and he feels no pain. And it's well established, if you've ever listened to me on any of these podcasts, I'm a huge comic book fan too. This was like, if the Juggernaut was a real person, this is who that was. And I was just in awe and a little bit terrified at the same time of this 400-pound man running through people. And then on top of that, the fact that he could hit a perfect moonsault off the top rope as good as anybody who is 200 pounds or less.
Yeah, he's one of the people that gets named when talking about big men. Big old roly-polies who know, you can't just be a mummy in the ring. You got to learn how to move. You got to get up for people. It helps if you can do a high spot here or there. And that was Vader. Vader was an imposing force, but he could, they say he could move like a cruiserweight. And he's the guy that people should look to when you're that size to learn from. He definitely left his mark on the sport. Just to give you some demographics here, he was born in 1955 in Linwood, California. He died at the age of 63, which is really scary. as you know, I mean, granted, I didn't live the life that Vader lived, but you know, I'm not that far away from 63. You're a little behind me, but that's young. In 2018, to die at 63 is too young. He died of heart failure and pneumonia. He had runs in the AWA, Catch Wrestling Association, New Japan, the Universal Wrestling Association, obviously World Championship Wrestling, the WWF, and I think towards the end of his career, other than he had a stop in TNA, and he did some indies, and I think before it was all said and done, he was also, I believe he was a developer, wasn't he? He built like malls and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a funny part in the Wrestling with Shadows documentary about Bret Hart and the Montreal Screwjob, where they're kind of talking to some of the guys backstage, and Vader literally rolls out blueprints and schematics of a strip mall that he's in the process of helping to build.
Actually, remember that. Let's talk a little bit about, I think, what probably the height of his career, because, like I said, the WWF was sort of a mixed bag run for him. So let's talk about, I think, what he's best known for. Obviously, he was big in Japan. That's where I think he made his biggest mark. It's what made him a valuable commodity here in the United States. He was seen as a monster there. Pat, real quick, you want to weigh in on his run in Japan, his early run?
In his first appearance as Big Van Vader, he caused a riot that got New Japan banned from their home arena for a year and a half when he beat Antonio Inoki in 2.5 minutes in a squash. Immediately put him on the map as this guy is the guy, and became one of the most successful foreigners in Japan. Built a reputation and a legacy that carried him through really the rest of his career. And even when in the States he had kind of been pushed down the card and forgotten about, when he returned to Japan, he was just as over as ever.
He would go from Japan to World Championship Wrestling. I feel like this was the era where Ric Flair had run off with the belt. So they were in need of a top heel. This is, I think, the Sting era, the Surfer Sting era as champion, if I remember correctly. So let's talk a little bit about that, the feud between Vader and Sting, and what else Vader was known for in the sort of his World Championship Wrestling heyday.
Yeah. So if there's an immediate match I think of a lot of times when I'm thinking of Vader and Sting, they had ignore the silly title, a White Castle of Fear strap match. Now, the White Castle element is silly, and of course when you're talking about a heavy-set guy, including White Castle in this conversation, right, it's a joke. I think a lot of people remember the silly mini-movie of Sting taking a helicopter up into the Rockies to meet Vader at his castle. But in reality, what it led to was a match you didn't really see in the United States in mainstream wrestling at that point. It wasn't just a strap match. It was vicious. It was hard-hitting. These guys really beat the hell out of each other. Sting cracked a rib during the match. Vader, he had the back of his ear was lacerated pretty badly from the strap. It was violent. It was definitely not the stuff WWE was doing at the time. It really wasn't commonplace for WCW. And it made such an impact and an impression with, I think, almost everybody who saw it right off the bat that, this guy's different. This isn't your run-of-the-mill heel. This is a different animal altogether. And he just crippled Sting.
What do you know of his locker room reputation amongst the boys, vis-a-vis how stiff he was? We have our cute little chat name on Messenger is Strong Style, and he's he's my avatar. He was definitely included in that. I believe he was known for not necessarily purposely potatoing people, but he did work very. From what I recall, he worked very stiff. He was very snug, and there was some guy who just plain didn't want to wrestle the guy because they figured they were in for an ass kicking.
Yeah, so when you wrestled Vader, one of the terms that gets used is live rounds. And that's referring to the punches and forearms he's throwing. He's throwing live rounds, not, blanks, because he's hitting you very snug and very stiff. And he's not doing it with the express intention of trying to hurt you. It's just how he does it. And, there's two types of things you'll hear. There are actually three types of things you'll hear about that. Ricky Steamboat, who I consider one of the great in-ring performers of all time, has said that when working with Vader, when Vader would do that, he would just kind of have to grab a hold and say, Leon, you don't have to convince me. We just have to convince the people. And at that point, Vader would lighten up a little bit and kind of just work a little bit more. There were guys like Mick Foley who were willing to take that kind of punch from Vader because they knew they could give it back to him and he wouldn't complain. And then there were guys like Shawn Michaels who, if you threatened to give him a black eye or a fat lip or mess up in his face, he would threaten to, quote, have your fat ass fired, unquote.
Yeah, I want to get there and talk about that at length. But what do you think was Vader's crowning moment in WCW? What's the high point? Like, if you were to point to one match where it was like, this is where he reached the peak of his career, up to that point in WCW, where would you point to?
It's hard for me not to really reference the match I already did with Sting, because that was really like such a turning point in establishing Vader as really not just the top heel, but he was going to be the top guy in WCW really through most of 1992 and 1993. And he was really a regular fixture on pay-per-view, in the main events, on TV. I have to point to that one as, this was really the launch of Vader into that undisputed top guy level.
Talk to me about Vader and Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan doesn't seem like the kind of guy who really wants to get in there with a stiff fucker like Vader. And maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't think he was too fond of working with the guy. But Hogan was the man when he came to WCW, and it was like, well, if you want to work with the top guys, you're working with Hogan.
It was one of those things where Hulk has always liked working with monster heels because he always did good money with them and felt he could have a good match with just about any of them. And we grew up in the 80s Hulkamania era where it was really common to see him in there with the one-man gang or Kamala or Andre or King Kong Bundy and all these monsters that he liked to work with. And Vader, at least, from a cosmetic visual standpoint, fit that bill to a T. However, unlike those guys, like you pointed out, Vader's going to hit you. And when Vader's hitting you, Vader's hitting you. And, I can just imagine, Hulk kind of, after the first time they worked together, going, that doesn't work for me, brother. And
no more for me, thanks. I'm driving.
So, they did work a program through a lot of the early part of 95 into mid-95, and a lot of that was due to what was unfortunately a real lack of legitimate, credible top heels in WCW to work with Hogan. So it was one of those situations where I think Hulk kind of painted himself into a corner and really didn't have a choice but to work with Vader at that time. And there were moments in that feud that made Vader look good, like Vader kicking out of the leg drop at 1. And then there's moments where Hulk no-sells a powerbomb, and it's like, I know it's Hulk, and he's going to, at some point, kick out of the finish and Hulk up and do what the people want to see. But, this is, again, it's perception. I perceived Vader differently from watching him in WCW than I had perceived the one-man gang or King Kong Bundy or any of those guys. Not that they weren't good, but Vader was portrayed as this deadly, deadly force that did things that those guys didn't do. So to see that, it was one of those things where, that doesn't work for me, brother. You know what I'm saying?
Before we sort of change tones here and deal with the WWF run of Vader, let's talk about how he left, which was kind of on a sour note. He had built up all this prestige and and all this firepower in WCW, and he kind of goes off on a whimper with a really with quite the controversial incident. Of course, I'm talking about the locker room brawl with Paul Orndorff.
Yeah, and there's two versions of this story that have been floated around, but the ending and the outcome has never changed, unfortunately for Vader. And what it was there was some kind of thing where there was a photo shoot or something, and Paul Orndorff, who was working as an agent at the time because his in-ring career was winding down, basically approached Vader at a certain point when Vader was leaving and not wanting to do something, and told Vader he needs to go do it. And Vader kind of told him where to go. And if you're not familiar with Paul Orndorff, Paul doesn't sweat anybody. And even when he only had one good arm at this point, because his right arm had atrophied very badly due to nerve damage, Paul didn't care. And whether he sucker punched Vader or just hauled off and hit him face to face is in some sort of question. But what's not in question is that he dropped Vader with one punch, proceeded to kick him in the face wearing shower shoes, and had to be pulled off of him.
Jeez. Vader
For the record, there's no shame in getting beat up by Paul Orndorff at any point, including now.
No. What I was going to say is, and I think this bears fleshing out, is you can play a tough guy on TV, and you can be a tough guy, but I think what Vader was also known for backstage was being a really nice dude. Like Go ahead.
Well, I think as he got older, that became more of his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that a lot of people have gone on record as saying they didn't like doing business with him because he could go from kind of this bully character on the screen to just being really difficult, and he's been called a big baby multiple times in the past by people like Eric Bischoff, Jim Cornette in a different kind of way, in terms of like how easy he got his feelings hurt.
Do you think it's like a Goldberg thing where you start to buy, or Warrior thing, where you start to buy into your own hype, and then when things change, when you're no longer the invulnerable, monster Doomsday, you're like, you start to get sort of a feeling of
humility a little bit.
Yeah, entitlement. The word I was looking for was entitled. All of a sudden you're not the center of attention, and you're not being looked at as the strongest guy in the room, and you start to feel like, well, you were entitled to this big push and everything. And I think some of the wrestlers, and maybe Vader was one of them, just sort of fell into the trap of not remembering it's a work, bro.
I could easily see that, and Vader's a guy who I could have easily seen being stirred up by other people to think that way. He worked under Bill Watts in WCW for a time, and Bill was definitely a guy who liked to stir it up and kind of put ideas into guys' heads to really get them to do what he wanted them to do. And so for Vader to go out there and, be the guy who was supposed to fear nobody, feel nothing, I don't care, I'm going to step on you or step over you, I could easily see Bill kind of motivating him to be doing that in real life too.
So, Vader makes a switch after a time. In 1996, he's part of the class of ex-WCW guys that abandon or get fired from World Championship Wrestling and make the jump over to WWF. It's Vader, Steve Austin, Dustin Runnels, Mark Marrow,
Cactus Jack.
Yep, Mick Foley, a whole slew of guys jump ship.
Triple H.
Triple H is in there. So, between 95 and 96, there's this big turnover of wrestlers. Lex Luger goes to WCW, being one example. Somewhere in there is also people taking trips back and forth through ECW. So they also acquire the talents of Too Cold Scorpio, blah, blah,
Ron
Simmons. Vader comes in once again with this retarded push, just crazy. And this is the part that I remember a lot, because like I said, I didn't know who Vader was. And he didn't do the bit with the smoke machine or the crazy headgear or anything. Vince McMahon refers to him as the man they call Vader, and he's nicknamed the Mastodon, and occasionally he's wearing a shirt that says Colorado University on it, which I thought was a little weird, but I'll talk about that in a second. But overall, Vader comes in to much aplomb. He, a lot of pomp and circumstance. He's killing everybody, and he's working with the top guys almost immediately. I think he throws Yokozuna a beating at one point. He goes pretty far. I don't know if it's this Rumble or the next one where he goes pretty far and he ends up in the it's the 97 one where he ends up in the main event at the following In Your House, the Final Four, which is a highly regarded In Your House and one people should watch. Vader goes on to have some crazy feuds between 96 and 97. One of the highlights, or lowlights depending on how you look at it, is his feud with Shawn Michaels. Their feud culminates in a one-time only match, pay-per-view match at SummerSlam, which was great from what I remember. But unfortunately, Vader and Shawn had some issues. So talk a little bit about that, Pat. I mean, I know getting up to that point, Vader was on again, off again, injured. So kind of an auspicious start to his WWF career. But I think things really started to sour for him with the backstage antics and Shawn Michaels threatening him. So what are the details there?
Well, I'll tell you this, and I'll give the fan perspective of it first, because this is one of those things I vividly remember. I wasn't real enamored with the WWF product at the time as a whole. Shawn just didn't, pardon the pun here, click with me as champion. And this was a match going into it where I was like, oh, well, now he's dropping the belt, because there's no way, anybody's going to buy that he can get past Vader. Like, okay, he got past, Bulldog, all right, I get it. He got past, this guy. He's not getting past Vader. And they even had Vader pin him the month prior at the In Your House pay-per-view they did with a six-man tag main event. Well, in a leading to this match, Shawn is working Vader on the house shows, and he doesn't like that Vader works stiff and snug, and maybe he pulled Shawn's hair once too many times or whatever. Well, one day in the back, after they have this match, in front of everybody, Shawn goes on this tirade, literally yelling at him about, if you fuck with me again, I'm going to have your big fat fucking ass fired. And just a profanity-laced tirade against this guy in front of everybody, just dressing him down. And, Cornette wasn't there at the time, but he sees Vader after, almost on the verge of tears, and says, Leon, what the hell happened? And Vader says, Shawn said if I didn't stop, hitting and whatever, he's going to get me fired. And we go into the SummerSlam match, and there's a very memorable spot in this match that kind of shows Shawn's attitude to the whole thing. Shawn is going to leap off the top for an elbow and miss it. Vader doesn't remember that spot, and instead of rolling out of the way, Vader stays there. So Shawn kind of very awkwardly comes down from the top rope and yells at Vader on the ground, move! And then stomps him in the head. And yells, move! Again, and stomps him on the head live on pay-per-view. And I remember watching that and going, something telling me he wasn't supposed to sit there like that. And basically, from that instance, now the match itself goes on, and Vader winds up initially winning by count out, and then he doesn't want to win by count out. He can't win the belt, so they restart the match, and then Vader wins by disqualification because Shawn uses Jim Cornette's racket on Vader. He doesn't want to win that way. He can't win the belt, and then it goes to Shawn gets Vader with the super kick and pins him and goes over him clean as a sheet after he already lost to him twice in one of the more convoluted, annoying finishes of the era. Because, again, you just had him lose twice to Vader, and then all of a sudden he's able to beat him. Come on. And I'll basically just say, come on, and leave it at that.
I think it would have been one thing if they had just gone with, like a DQ schmaz ending, and they had actually gotten 2 more matches out of these guys. But Shawn was done with Vader by this point. And I think Vader, career-wise, would have liked to have gone longer with Shawn and and done 2 more matches, leading into Survivor Series. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure personally he was like, let me get as far away from this asshole as I can.
I don't think Vader liked working with Shawn any more than Shawn seemed to not like working with Vader.
Well, I mean, when you're a guy that likes to get all rough and tumble in there, and get all strong style, as we say, it's hard to work with a guy who expects you to be light as a feather all the time. There's a reason why Shawn liked working with his buddies, is because they all worked light as a feather. They weren't stiff. Sometimes it's why some of their matches look like hot garbage. But looking at you, Diesel. But he would go on to have memorable matches, from what I recall, with Mankind. Moving away from Shawn, moving from 97 to 98. I don't quite remember as much. I mean, I think he's just sort of floating around. I think by the time it was all over, and I want to say this might have been the 97 Survivor Series, if I remember correctly. Is that the one where he was like, I'm just a fat piece of shit?
No, that's a little bit later. That's the following year.
Okay.
But the 97 Survivor Series is about a month after his kind of forced face turn.
Mm-hmm. So, how would you describe those 97, 98 for Vader?
Up until mid-97, he was still doing good. He was programmed with The Undertaker in a decent feud that really never kind of went away in full until they had a WWF title match on the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view. And it was actually one of Vader's 3 or 4 best WWF matches, and a really good match for The Undertaker, who I don't really particularly enjoy, but I think he had a good chemistry with Vader, and that match was probably the best that they had together. And again, it's a good deal to be working for the title in a pay-per-view spot, even if it's not the main event. That's a good spot to have, but at that point, I think more than anything, the injury bug started to bite him again, and he was kind of being forced to take time off here and there. And the face turn, which I kind of alluded to, that's really where Vader really gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. To sort of close out this little bit here on the WWF, and then we're going to sort of talk about the very end of his career, and then we'll move into the second part of our show, which is we're going to commentate over one of his matches. Definitely not one of his WWF ones. But Jim Cornette said in a shoot interview, as part of the reason that Vader's WWF run was not as successful as was hoped was due to the failure to properly book Vader. Think Jim's right about that?
Yeah, I do. I'm not going to completely say it's on them, because we mentioned, and Bruce Pritchard talked about it a lot in the show he did on Vader. Vader had a bad habit of getting injured at a bad time and needing to take time off when there was momentum being built around him. Probably the best example is they literally had a pay-per-view called It's Time, and Vader wasn't even on the show because he was nursing an injury.
That's right. That was Bret Hart and Sid.
Yeah, and he wasn't even on the show. And the show was initially being built around him in the main event, hence the subtitle, and he wasn't even on the show. But I do think that they didn't book him well. For me, he came in, and I know that they wanted to give him time off immediately to heal up some existing injuries that he had from WCW. So that's why they did the whole angle where he attacked Gorilla Monsoon. which how much more hate can you get somebody than having them attack Gorilla Monsoon? Nobody put their hands on Gorilla, and Vader gives him the Vader bomb and the whole deal. That was great. That was how you really make somebody hateable. And, so he took time off for that. They programmed him with Yoko, which I get what they were trying to do. They were wanting to establish this new monster. But Yoko was in such bad shape at the time, couldn't really move, didn't have his wheels, and was heavier and bigger than Vader. I don't think it was well thought out. And then they tried to keep him hot before the title feud, but he meandered for a while, and that doesn't help overall.
No.
And so when you don't know what to do with a guy consistently, they're not going to be able to build momentum to get a real serious push in. And when they finally did, and they had the opportunity, they did not go with him for whatever reason. And I'm not going to say Shawn Michaels' stroke or whatever. It's too easy of an answer. I'm sure there was more than just Shawn not wanting to drop the belt. But I'm sure that's part of it. I don't know why they didn't go with him as the new monster, that they could have Shawn chase for the belt. Instead, that went to Sid a couple months later, and he didn't really chase him. He got one pay-per-view off and then took it back from the next one. I just think there were opportunities with Vader when he was healthy that they didn't pursue, and they found it easier to use Vader to make somebody else, even when that somebody else wasn't in their long-term plans. And I think he's probably one of the better examples of WWE just not taking guys they didn't make as seriously as guys they do. And had he come in maybe repackaged with a different gimmick, maybe they would have given him more or done something. But because he had, that WCW taint on him, I don't think they were ever going to really fully go with him unless they absolutely had a gun held to their head. And that's a shame, because he was, in my opinion, he's the best monster ever.
As I think about it, and, in hindsight being 2020, the problem with the Steve Austin title run was when they finally shifted the belt from Shawn to Steve, they found themselves in the dubious position of not having any strong heels for Steve to fight. Steve would inevitably get into a feud with Mick Foley, and then he would transition into a feud with The Undertaker. Somewhere in this is Kane. And so he kind of floats between those. Now, overall of this is Vince McMahon. I understand that. But I think there was an opportunity here in '98 for Steve and Vader to have had a program. And I think had they rebuilt Vader and reintroduced him as a killer monster, maybe instead of Mick Foley, Vince McMahon's killer monster, somewhere between the spring of '98 and the eventual rise of The Rock, which is November of '98, we might have seen something out of it. We might have seen a resurgence, because at this point, going from '98, '99, and 2000, Shawn's gone. The clique outside of Triple H is gone, and Triple H is no mamby-pamby. Triple H will throw back and forth with you. There's a lot of guys in there, I think, at this point that are more willing to wrestle Vader's style. He might have been able to turn this around, I think. But again, by that point, a lot of the shine was off of him, so who knows? But I kind of want to get your opinion on that before we look at some of his outside the wrestling activities, and then we look at our match.
Yeah, Vader would have been just as good a choice as anybody. The Mick Foley turn really came from out of nowhere and was clearly just a necessity of, we didn't get anybody ready for this, and we don't have anybody. Who's a top guy that we can do something with? And it was felt that, well, Mick is, established and worked hard, and he's versatile. We'll do it with him. But it really, the Dude Love heel turn felt very out of place. And they did good business, but a lot of that was because of the looming presence of Mr. McMahon. And before they got Kane in there, I think they'd have benefited from somebody like Vader being in there, being a little more believable, being somebody who they could have worked with. But, it's at that same, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's at that same first pay-per-view where they go with Mick Foley and Steve Austin the first time, that we got that, I don't know what it is, maybe Vader time's over, I'm just so big, I'm just a big fat piece of shit promo.
Over the Edge in a mask versus mask match in which Vader attempted to use a wrench on Kane like the one used on him month before, but Kane managed to recover and defeat Vader, costing him his mask in the process. And in a post-match interview, yes, Vader said, I made the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe Vader time is over. I'm a big piece of shit. See, yeah, at this point, they're just writing him off instead of using him. I think we missed out on possibly a great feud between Vader and Steve Austin, because Steve would have gone with him. Steve would have traded.
Steve Austin's known for throwing those right hands, and like Mick Foley and Triple H were talking about after they had wrestled Stone Cold The Rock, and Mick Foley says to Triple H, he goes, hey Hunter, what's the biggest difference between working Austin and The Rock? And Triple H goes, Rock's punches don't hurt.
Vader was also known outside the ring to get a gig or two. He shows up as Goliath in the 1995 movie Fist of the North Star. He's got some television appearances, a couple of them, as a matter of fact. And I really want to get your take on this, because you are totally 80s Pat Mullin, though these happened in the 90s. He was on a few episodes of Boy Meets World. Isn't that right, Pat?
It is right, and I was a huge fan of Boy Meets World growing up. It was a staple of the TGIF lineup, of which my generation, lived and breathed, and you had to see the TGIF lineup, or you went to school on Monday with nothing to talk about. So TGIF was really just part of who this generation of people were, and Boy Meets World was one of those long-running shows. So being a wrestling fan, watching TGIF every Friday, and randomly seeing Vader show up on one of my favorite shows was pretty surreal and pretty awesome. And not just one time, he became an established recurring character as the father of one of the school's bullies, which makes perfect sense to anybody. What was also really cool was they had a character on the show named Mr. Turner, who was a teacher, played by Anthony Tyler Quinn, who bore a striking resemblance to Scott Hall. So at any point during that show, I thought there was the chance we could get Vader versus Scott Hall on that show, which was at the time a dream match because Vader was still a part of WCW, and Scott Hall was in the WWE as Razor Ramon. What we did eventually get on an episode of that show is Vader wrestling Jake Roberts, which was pretty cool, with a cameo appearance from none other than Brother Love Bruce Pritchard as the announcer.
Nice.
But just the fact that Vader had this role, and I don't know who it was that was responsible for bringing him in or coming up with this idea. I know that Ben Savage was a huge wrestling fan growing up. He's shown home movies of him with almost the entire LJN line of WWF figures, playing with them and stuff. So maybe it was his idea, like, hey, what if we got this guy to play this role? It would be great. But it was just so random and so cool, and Vader did it well. They didn't really ask him to play somebody extremely different from his on-screen persona, which was good, but he knew how to play it enough for laughs without making himself look like an idiot. And it was fun. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think he did 4 episodes of the show. I could be wrong, but the fact that he got that and had that consistent recurring role was really cool.
Yeah, the few episodes of Boy Meets World that I saw, definitely one of them was the one with Vader, and I thought he had a really fun appearance. All right, we're going to switch gears now. This is the commentary portion of our Remembering Big Van Vader. What do we got on tonight's tap, Pat? What are we drinking?
So this match happens April 17th of 1993. This is the full uncut version of the match from Mick Foley's personal collection. It is the match that kickstarted, really, more than anything, the long Vader versus Cactus Jack feud in WCW, which was my favorite Vader feud in WCW because of the nature of these matches. They are hard-hitting, unforgiving, brutal things that, like we talked about with Vader as a character, were not commonplace in American wrestling at all at the time, unless, you were in Philadelphia at a bingo hall. Tee-hee-hee. But this match, is noted for something we'll talk about as it goes on that was censored on the TBS network. TBS refused to air portions of it because of the level of violence. And I think it's a good demonstration of what made Vader such a scary, awesome heel. And I think Mick was one of those guys that he just had this unbelievable chemistry with because of the nature of their characters and how the styles of those characters played off of each other in this kind of match. And that's one of the things that makes Vader great.
All right, here we go. We're going to go ahead and press play. And this is WCW Saturday Night, April 17th, 1993, as we see a grinning Cactus Jack. You think he'd ever thought, in 1993, where his career would end up and what would be the his crowning achievement, pulling a sock out of his drawers and shoving it down people's throats?
I think he probably thought he'd retire with 2 ears at this point, but we know how that went.
Now, who's managing Vader? Who's our curly-haired gentleman there on ringside?
That is the 7-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Harley Race.
We see a lock up there. No one's going anywhere. We got 2 hosses in the ring right here. We got Vader, a slimmer Vader than we'll see in the WWF later, 2-3 years later. He's still got a bit of a belly on him, but he isn't. It's not quite as pronounced.
And a fairly in shape Mick Foley, who is going to work with some real stiff elbows and now a little bit of pounding to the back of the head and some hard kicks in the corner. And you'll see the corner cam here is really where they edit stuff out on the TBS broadcast. Interesting note. And no gloves for Vader. Vader always wore like MMA gloves before anybody knew what they were. No gloves on for Vader here, and there's a reason for that. We'll see.
So, did these two get any heat for having such a vicious kind of match in the MGM Studios there in Disney World?
I think this one was actually done at Center Stage in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. But at the time, big right hand from Vader, and there are the standard Vader stiff punches.
Mm.
Oh,
right across the nose. That's going to ruin your day.
And, oh, man, Mick's feeling those punches, just straight right hands.
Yeah, he is. Pat, what happens when you get punched in the nose, even the side of the nose?
Your eyes will tear up, and your nose will feel like it broke, even though it didn't.
And Vader saying, come on, Mick. Come on, Cactus. I thought you were tougher than all that. Meanwhile, Mick's like, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Punch me in the nose.
One of the reasons they're getting away with this, one of the reasons they're getting away with this is WCW is in the midst of a power transition. Very shortly after this, Eric Bischoff will assume the role of executive vice president, and even then, backhand to the nose. Even then, Bischoff is only going to really be responsible for production, not necessarily the booking of it. And here's where it gets,
We're not seeing much wrestling here. It's a lot of punches. This is...
Well,
go ahead.
You've got the big angry Hoss, world champion Invader, and the crazy, brawler outlaw Cactus Jack. So this wasn't going to be, Luthez versus Pat O'Connor.
No, this isn't even going to be Ken Shamrock versus Dan Severn.
And here,
Yep.
and I think right there might have been the moment where Vader broke Mick's nose.
Well, he hit it enough times. Jesus Christ, that was right on the bridge. And a kick in the face.
With the toe of the boot.
That's right.
And that was kind of what Mick, sickly enough, wanted to do in this match. Mick wanted Vader to break his nose to really build heat for this angle that they were doing. And Mick catches Vader in the air and slams him. But what Mick wanted real heat, and he felt the way to get that was a brutally stiff match where Cactus, who had always been sold as this guy who enjoys pain, could get sympathy from the audience as a babyface by seeing, something visibly very bad happen to him, like his nose breaking. And right there, something you don't ever see from Mick, going off the top rope with a clothesline.
Got to take some chances in the ring with a monster as big as Vader. Got to stick and move, because apparently if you just stand there, he will break your face. And he knocked Vader to the outside. And a close. Oh, so that spot looked like they screwed it up.
I wouldn't doubt that they were supposed to go over that guardrail and not through it.
No, he was totally doing this spot where he clotheslines the guy over the top rope. But that guardrail was... Oh, what did Harley ever do to you?
He got in the way. But if you look at... we're looking at the guardrail. It's not easy to go over a guardrail when it's not connected to anything. And it will tilt over when 800 pounds of mass hits it.
Right. No, and again, it's not like he jumped or got up or anything for that clothesline. He just takes it square across the shoulders and falls backwards, and it's just like, well, here we go. And it's so funny because Mick Foley looks like he's expecting Vader to backflip over the thing, and when they both fall, he's like, oh God.
Yeah, and Vader, I'm sure the fear of God was put into him on the way down when he has to unhook his arms from behind the guardrail, or else he's like, oh, I'm going to shatter my arms now.
Yes. Oh, no, I've broken my femur.
Yeah.
All right.
Here's me kind of getting down and dirty with headbutts, punches, and now a sleeper trying to choke Vader out. And that's one of my favorite Mick bumps.
Yeah, jumping on a guy's back seldom works out for the guy on the guy's back. I remember William Brown jumped on my back as I was walking home from elementary school, and I ran his ass directly into a tree. Yeah,
and that's one where instead of getting rammed into something, Vader literally threw his weight back. Oh, and this is Mick's personal unedited footage. And Vader is just... he's just really trying to break his nose. And he puts his fist up to the camera with Mick's blood all over it.
Vader has now lost the mask. He said, enough of this jockstrap on my head. I mean business.
Mick's got a crimson mask right now.
That's right. You think he did some aspirin and beer before the match? Really get a nice flow going?
He might have taken an aspirin and a shot of Jack Daniels.
And he pounds him down in the corner.
That's Vader right there.
I think we've seen a sleeper hold and a clothesline. That's it. That's all the wrestling that's happened in this match so far, and as we are almost 7 minutes into it.
Another right hook.
Oh my goodness.
Now goes Cactus. And now Harley's getting some retribution there for that clothesline earlier.
Well, he should have put his hands on Harley Race. Harley Race wasn't doing nothing. He wasn't pulling on the ring ropes or anything or interfering. He was just there to encourage his man on, and and Mick took a cheap shot. He deserves everything he gets. Dirty old Cactus Jack.
Oh wait, wrestling hold? Perhaps?
And boom.
A good old Samoan drop.
Yes.
Slam.
All right. Vader's going to use the ropes to pull himself up as Mick lies prone on the mat. Are we going for a Vader bomb here? It might be time. It's time. Vader bomb. Here we go. Going to get some spring there. Boom. And he hits it.
You got all of that.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of belly. It's a lot of belly on your face.
And I'm not going to pin him. I'm going to break his nose again. Just a hammer fist right to the bridge of the nose.
It's funny. All these years later, and you and I watch MMA, nobody does that. Nobody when they have the possibility of ending the fight, just showboats, just silly things in there. That's the beauty of professional wrestling. Sure, I could have won the match, but why not punch him a few more times?
Yeah, although Mike Jackson seemed to do that against CM Punk, ironically.
That wasn't a fight. That was me wrestling my son, and my son put up more of a fight than CM Punk does.
And the action is spilled back to the outside as Nick Patrick trying to get some control here and get them back in the ring.
This is going to end badly for Harley. Yeah, it does.
Harley done took another inside-out bump on a clothesline that missed by Vader, but Vader just tackles Nick.
Harley is currently asking, did anyone get the license plate of that truck that just hit me? Nick's crawling on the outside. Vader's back in. Ref's trying to get some control back of this match. Oh! Won't even let him get back into the ring. Kicks him right in the face. But Mick holds on to the rope. Does Mick get mutilated at all in this one? Because I know that they've had these two have had some interesting encounters where people
aside from his nose being smeared all over his face, no.
Okay.
And that's a fairly minimal Mick Foley injury, knowing what we know of Mick now.
Yes. And like I said, I think with the spot that they're trying to do here, it's not working out very well. But I believe when Mick does the over the top rope clothesline bit is where he loses the ear in Germany, as I recall.
Actually, no. Mick liked to do a spot that a lot of guys did where they would get their head caught in the ropes and end up kind of hanging themselves. If you remember that?
Yes.
And Vader goes to splash him through the guardrail and eats guardrail. Mick did that with very loose ropes because Scorpio had asked him to loosen up the ropes so he could get some spring on them. That tore the ear, but not off. Mm-hmm. Vader punched him in the ear about half a minute after that, and that knocked the ear to the ground.
Okay. Now, it's Stan Hansen who knocks Vader's eye out, isn't it?
Yeah, and Cactus with a somersault plancha to Vader.
By the way, I don't mean to pick on World Championship Wrestling in 1993, but what stage manager thought it was a good idea to have loose guardrails?
Well, since he's not yet in production, though it's in vogue, they would normally blame Eric Bischoff, but he's not in charge here, so I'm going to say Bob Dew, who was kind of running things at the time.
It just looks like garbage. It looks a little high school gym-ish.
And after missing the splash, Vader is on the receiving end of a count-out loss. And so he pulls 10 feet of guardrail and chucks it against the ring.
Not like you do. We're throwing a tantrum now. Vader's like, I punched him 9 million times and I lost the match anyway. And Harley got out of town there. Woo! Goodness gracious. We are backstage now with the voice of World Championship Wrestling, Tony Schiavone. And I don't know what Vader is saying here, but he seems really angry.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's a lot of, you didn't beat Vader, Vader's still the man, I'm going to hurt you. And basically what this leads to is one of the goofier angles in WCW history where following week they have a rematch and Vader powerbombs Cactus on the floor.
Oh.
And
is this the Lost in Cleveland bit?
Yes, and concusses him so badly that he gets amnesia and is lost somewhere in Cleveland, Ohio.
Who booked this shit?
That would be the American Dream, baby, Dusty Rhodes.
We love you, Dusty. We didn't do a show when you passed, but we probably should have. However, not all your ideas were zingers. That's for certain. They can't all be, and that one certainly wasn't.
Baby, I'm a super genius, but not everybody has a perfect batting average. You understand what I'm saying, baby?
I do, Dusty. I do. All right, that takes us to the end of our video here, and really the end of our podcast. Look, I give Vader all the credit in the world. He was a super heavyweight who could move. He really didn't get the shot that he deserved in the WWF. Hopefully people remember his matches in WCW fondly. His and if you can find any of his matches from Japan, where he really shone and was treated like the big giant monster. Go ahead and watch those. That's where Vader shines the brightest. He will certainly be missed, and I hope that future super heavyweight wrestlers go back and watch some of this footage and learn how one of the great ones did it. Pat, I'll give you the final word.
Vader accomplished some incredible things in the course of his career. He's the only guy to this day who held recognized world championships in North America, Europe, and Asia at the same time, or not at the same time, but within one calendar year. He won the UWA World Championship in Mexico from El Canek, who was a huge star there. He held the CWA World Heavyweight Championship in Germany that he won from Otto Wanz, who was the biggest star in Europe. And in Japan, he, of course, in the early 90s, held the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. And later on, when he reinvented his career, after the WWE, when he went back to Japan, this time with All Japan, he really breathed new life into his career, got motivated, got in better shape, and went out there and had just great matches and held the All Japan Triple Crown and became the first guy to have held the IWGP Heavyweight Championship and the All Japan Triple Crown, which is basically the Japanese equivalent of being the first guy to hold the WWF and WCW World Heavyweight titles, to put it in perspective. So it's a huge deal.
Who had more belts at one time, him or Ultimo Dragon?
I don't think anybody had more belts than Ultimo Dragon at one time.
That's the one thing I really remember of him was, god damn, he was draped in belts.
I think Dragon at one time held the J Crown, which was 8 championship belts, the WCW Cruiserweight title, which is a 9th belt, and I think he had one more belt besides those, so I think he's carrying around 10 belts, which I don't know how he got through airport security, but it was 1996. Nobody cared about airport security then.
No, but I think the bigger question was how he got through the airport carrying 2 tons of fucking belts on him. Was he using a crane? Did he have a dolly? These are important questions, Pat Mullin, but not tonight. The mystery shall remain unsolved. All right. I hope everyone has enjoyed our retrospective of Vader. One day we should do another one of these when the guy isn't dead. But Jesus Christ, maybe we'll do a Scott Steiner one, huh?
They're not really giving us those options.
No, they're dropping like flies here, unfortunately. I think just for shits and giggles, we should do one on Scott Steiner and then send it to Gavin personally. Just put it in his email.
I think we should send it to Scott Steiner, and I will gladly wear my newly acquired Steiner Brothers T-shirt from ShirtGunWedding.com. Yes, ShirtGunWedding.com. That specialize in retro recreation tees of your favorite wrestlers from the past. Mark, you would love some of the stuff they have on there. Go on over and check them out at ShirtGunWedding.com.
How many Rick Rudes do you own right now?
They don't have any Rick Rude reproductions yet. However, WWE Shop did come up with a pretty cool neon-colored Rick Rude shirt. It's the first decent Rick Rude shirt I've seen released in ever since his original run. So I had to buy it.
So speaking of Gavin, I understand the Casual Heroes actually put out a show. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so Gavin released his first show under the new title of Old Games, Old Guys, and it was about Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. It's a fun watch. The Casual Heroes are coming back. And there are a lot of things on tap. Gavin and I were having a conversation the other day about some formatting for a couple things. But Casual Heroes are back, and we're going to be better than ever, just like Eric Bischoff. It's an exciting time to be a podcaster, ladies and gentlemen. There's so many things going on that are so fun, and this is one of them. I love TV Party. I love the stuff Mark does. He really doesn't get enough credit for just how much he's devoted to putting out great content consistently. If you guys enjoy it, rate Mark's stuff on this network. Talk about how great it is. Plug it to your friends. He just really goes above and beyond to do just such a great job and give us, for some reason, a voice. I don't know why he does it. I certainly wouldn't. But he's a better man than me because of that.
Well, thank you, Pat. That's very much appreciated. Speaking of content that I put out, I was not feeling it last night, but the show must always go on. That's what I truly believe. And so despite the fact that I was tired, and tired brought out the silly, and the silly brought out the nonsense, we tried to review Amorphous Queen of Time on the Metal Hammer of Doom. And there's talk of restaurants and the kind of fought that's out in the street right now, saying to people, "You want to go punch for punch?" It was an aggressive fought. That's what it was. We talked about any number of things. At one point in the show, I wanted to talk about anything but Amorphous, and that's a shame because Amorphous put out an outstanding album, one of the best of the year. But
a lot of people are listening to Sexorcism now because of our podcast, Mark.
Well, you know what? That's fantastic. And you know what? Every show we do talk about the subject at hand, but we go off on a lot of tangents, and that's just because we're a bunch of fun guys who aren't afraid to have a little fun on a show where you're supposed to be reviewing music. Speaking of which, we also reviewed The Incredibles 2. I took a little time out of that show to do a rant about how the Star Wars franchise isn't broken. Get a hold of yourselves. So that was Damn You Hollywood. Pat's been spending a lot of time here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network. He was on Source Material as his alter ego, Pat Mullin, as he talked about the Trail of Galactus. And what a trail it was.
Not a happy trail.
No, it was not a happy trail at all. Next week, here on the Radulich Broadcasting Network, we're going to look at one of the pre-Final Crisis books, Salvation Run from the Justice League America. Another one where I got a little silly, but a little less silly than I was last night. On Damn You, Hollywood's going to review Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I'm sure it'll be terrible. And
Mark is taking applicants for someone to review Creed 2 with him because none of us want to see it.
Yes, everybody that I trust the podcast is running away from this as fast as possible. But I think I may have gotten Jason Teasley on board for that. So we'll talk about that in December. Meanwhile, back here in June, on the Metal Hammer of Doom, Jesse and I are going to review the new Bad Witch by 9 Inch Nails. And then we're going to take a look at some older 9 Inch Nails songs because I don't think Jesse's very familiar with the band. As far as TV party tonight...
Really, Jesse doesn't know a band?
It's crazy, isn't it? July 3rd, Luke Cage Season 2. Myself and Robert Winfrey will review it.
And it drops on Friday.
That's right. Some more TV parties for you in the month of July is Voltron, Seasons 5 and 6. Again, that'll be
God, it's already at 6 seasons?
Yeah, well, they're half seasons. That's why we're doing 2 of them. So Voltron, we'll be looking at now. It came out, season 6 just dropped recently. 5 dropped earlier in the year. We're going to look at them both, and then we got 2 for the price of 1. Another TV party on Thursday, July 26th. Myself and Sean Comer will discuss Glow Season 2. And a fun time will be had by all. So those are the TV parties coming up in the near and dear future. Pat, it's been a small slice of heaven having you here on TV Party tonight. Good friends, I am your mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified. This has been TV Party tonight. Be well, be safe, and behave.